It was a quiet evening when Emma noticed the flickering light across the street. She had been living in the neighborhood for years and knew every house, every routine, and every person. But the house across from hers had been empty for months, ever since old Mrs. Daniels passed away. Emma couldn't remember the last time she had seen anyone enter or leave the place. Tonight, however, there was a faint glow coming from one of the upstairs windows. At first, she dismissed it as a reflection from a passing car or a trick of the light, but it persisted. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she found herself standing at the window, staring across the street, wondering who could be inside. The longer Emma watched, the stranger it became. The light flickered on and off at irregular intervals, as if someone was moving through the house with a lantern. There was no sign of movement outside, no cars parked in front, and certainly no sounds of activity. She reached for her phone, contemplating whether she should call the police, but hesitated. What would she even say? A light in an abandoned house didn't exactly scream emergency. After all, it could be nothing, a faulty wire or a neighbor checking in on the property. Still, something about it unnerved her. She set her phone down but kept her eyes fixed on the window, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The light went out completely, plunging the house back into darkness. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Maybe it really was nothing. She tried to distract herself with the TV, but her mind kept drifting back to that window. Time passed slowly, and as she got up to head to bed, she noticed a figure standing in the driveway of the house across the street. Her heart skipped a beat. The figure was motionless, cloaked in shadow, barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight. She squinted, trying to make out any details, but they were too far away. Who could it be? The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the figure seemed to be staring directly at her house. Emma quickly closed her blinds, her heart racing. She paced her living room, torn between opening the blinds again to check if the figure was still there and calling someone for help. It wasn't like her to get so worked up over something like this, but there was something unsettling about the entire situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she opened the blinds just a crack and peered out. The figure was gone. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The light in the upstairs window flickered back on, casting an eerie glow. This time, she was sure there was movement behind the curtains. Someone was definitely inside. Unable to ignore the strange happenings any longer, Emma grabbed her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. She explained the situation as calmly as she could, but her voice wavered with unease. The dispatcher assured her they would send someone to check it out. Emma hung up, feeling slightly better knowing that help was on the way. She stayed by the window, watching the house intently, but no one came or went. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours and still no sign of the police. The light in the window went dark again, and the street was silent, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Just as Emma was beginning to think she had overreacted, she heard a knock on her door. Her heart leapt into her throat. She hadn't seen anyone approach her house, and it was far too late for visitors. She tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. To her relief, it was a police officer. She opened the door cautiously, letting the officer inside. "We got a call about some strange activity across the street?" the officer asked. Emma nodded and pointed to the house, explaining what she had seen. The officer listened carefully and then stepped outside to take a look. Emma watched from her porch, holding her breath as the officer approached the house. The officer knocked on the door of the empty house but got no response. After a few moments, he tried the door handle. It was locked. He circled around the side of the house, shining his flashlight into the windows, but everything appeared normal, at least from the outside. Emma stayed on her porch, feeling a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Maybe she had just imagined the whole thing. The officer returned to her, shaking his head. "No sign of anyone inside, ma'am. Could be a power issue, or maybe someone was checking on the place earlier and forgot to turn the light off. But there's nothing suspicious as far as I can tell." Emma thanked the officer, though she wasn't entirely convinced. As the patrol car pulled away, she couldn't help but feel that something was still wrong. She returned to her window, peeking through the blinds once more. The house across the street was dark and silent again, but the eerie feeling remained. She decided to try and get some sleep. though her mind raced with thoughts of what could have caused the lights and the figure she'd seen. Just as she was drifting off, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message simply read, "Stay away from the house." Emma sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She stared at the message, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could have sent it? Was it a prank? Or was someone really watching her? She thought about calling the police again but hesitated. If this was real, if someone was truly trying to scare her, calling the police might make things worse. She decided to delete the message and try to forget about it. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made her jump. She felt like she was being watched, even in the safety of her own home. The next morning, Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed to know what was going on in that house. After work, she made her way across the street, her heart pounding with each step. The air felt colder near the house, and the windows seemed to loom over her like dark, empty eyes. She knocked on the door, half expecting no one to answer. But to her surprise, the door creaked open slightly, as if it had been left unlocked. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open wider. The interior was dark, the smell of dust and neglect hanging in the air. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing through the empty hall. There was no response. Emma stepped inside, her footsteps soft on the creaking floorboards. The house was eerily quiet, every sound amplified in the stillness. She made her way to the staircase, the same one where she had seen the light flickering the night before. As she ascended, her heart raced faster. When she reached the top, she saw the room where the light had come from. The door was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, she pushed it open, revealing a small, cluttered room. Papers were scattered across the floor, and in the center of the room was a single chair facing the window. As Emma approached the chair, she felt a cold draft brush against her skin. She reached out to touch the back of the chair, and suddenly the door slammed shut behind her. She whipped around, her heart in her throat. She was trapped. Panic set in as she fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, a whispering voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come here." Emma's blood ran cold. She turned back toward the window, where she had seen the light the night before, and realized with growing dread that she wasn't alone in the house. Something, or someone, was watching her,